Today on the show, we're exploring alternate dimensions and asking a question popularized by a certain unnamed cinematic universe. And that question is, what if? Dune, season Dune. It's Dune.
Are you talking about DC?
Yeah, DC.
Aquaman, yeah. Aquaman 2?
Every movie's a flop, DC, yeah. Sorry, does that mean? I'm just looking at the numbers.
Is your mom's name also Mary?
My mom's also Mary.
What?
We should be best friends.
Did we just become best friends?
Is that a niche reference?
Did you get that joke, Elaine?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, you got the joke. No. Okay, great.
Wasn't it Martha, though?
Oh, it was Martha.
I wasn't sure completely.
Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name's Abu.
My name is Leo.
And Leo.
Yeah.
We have a friend on the show today.
We do. It's true.
It's true, Elaine!
Hello.
Hello.
I'm glad to be here.
We are so glad to have you back. You are a familiar voice for our listeners and our show because you've been on before with us.
Yeah.
And we're so excited to have you back once again.
Yeah, it's exciting topic.
And for those of you who don't recognize the dulcet tones of Elaine's beautiful voice, Elaine
Unsubscribe and go away. Oh, sorry.
Unsubscribe and leave. Walk out. You're not welcome here.
The door is that way.
No, Elaine runs NerdCookies, a really spectacular YouTube channel. It's really wonderful. I love the overall vibe, the episodes she produces about all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Because, Elaine, you kind of started with, I became aware of you when you were doing Dune stuff, but you've kind of expanded into a bunch of different topics, right?
Yeah. I think initially I started with Star Wars, but then quickly geared to Dune as, the new adaptation was ramping up. And it just quickly exploded from there. There was a lot of good feedback from the audience, so that was great. A lot of Dune fans were responding. So continued with that, and then branched into other realms of sci-fi. So it's it's kind of a mixed bag. There's Stargate, Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
Been doing some Warhammer 40K.
Oh, cool.
Just came out with a God Emperor of Dune comparison to the Emperor of Mankind from Warhammer 40K. So that was really fun.
Wow. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Wow. NerdCookies indeed.
NerdCookies indeed. And I was going to say, perfectly equipped you for today's episode.
Yes.
And what I want to tell you all about this episode, this is an idea that we've gotten a couple of times from people, but what if scenarios?
Yeah.
So alternative timeline scenarios within the Dune universe, which naturally, knowing how sci-fi universes play out and complex political scenes like Warhammer and like Dune will aid us very well, I think, in talking about today's episode. But I guess before we get too much into it, we should take care of some housekeeping.
Yeah. Bear with us, Elaine. We got to take care of some quick housekeeping here at the top of the show, starting with our spoiler warning. So today we're going to be talking through some what-if scenarios and alternate timelines, potential timelines in the Dune story. And that means there will be spoilers in today's discussion, but we will keep them contained up through Children of Dune. So we'll stick to just the first 3 books, and we'll avoid talking about the latter half of the series on today's episode and in the scenarios that we'll talk about today. So make sure that you have at least read through Children of Dune, and lucky for you, dear listener, we have complete chapter-by-chapter book club episodes for the first 3 books, and we're currently working through book 4. So if you haven't read them, now's the time. We recommend it. We like these books, as it turns out.
If you couldn't tell by our 170 fucking episodes about Dune. Indeed. And finally, we have a huge shout out, as always, to our Quisatz Hatterack level patron, Case Aiken.
Ooh,
Case. What if someone was so generous you couldn't even put it into words?
My God.
And I think you answer that question every day.
Yeah.
So thank you, Case.
We don't need an alternate timeline. We live in it now. His name is Case Aiken.
That's this timeline. Yeah. Thank you to Case. And thank you to all of our patrons. Again, what you contribute makes what we do possible. Oh, look at that. We did our housekeeping, and shout out Mapes is proud and happy.
We did.
So delighted that we tidied up after ourselves.
All right. So as Leo said, today's episode is going to be all about what if scenarios in the Dune universe. And how we decided to tackle the conversation is that each of us, me, Leo, Elaine, picked a what if scenario for all of us to discuss together as a group, a potential alternate version of events than what took place in the book.
Right.
So we'll share how we think how the stories would play out in those situations, for better or worse. And to round out the episode, we'll actually be taking it upon ourselves to rewrite Dune.
Blasphemy.
The audacity. We'll round out today's episode by sharing something in the story that we would change or would want an alternate version of in the Dune universe if we had the privilege of rewriting certain parts of it or exploring different versions of it.
Right.
All right, so that's the game plan for today. Before we jump into it, let's take a breather. Let's prep ourselves. But don't go anywhere, dear listener. We will be right back with Elaine to talk about Dune What If scenarios. Stick with us.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. Hope you're ready to dive into the Dune season of What If. Because in our first episode, we have our first scenario. And the scenario is this. What if the the poison tooth successfully killed Baron Vladimir Harkonnen of House Harkonnen?
The tooth.
What if he died from the poison tooth? The Watcher guides us through this episode.
That's right.
And actually, I'll start off because I chose this scenario and I feel very strongly about it. And here's how I think it would play out. Okay.
Okay.
Baron's dead. Hi ho
the king is dead?
The king is, yeah, sure. The king is dead. Oh, Lord, the king is dead. House Harkonnen is in disarray, and with Paul and Jessica in the desert, presumed dead, I want to start by looking at what House Carino would do, right? Like the Emperor Shaddam on his throne, he's kind of like manipulated these two houses to come to a fight, and the heads of houses are dead with no heirs declared. So, from Count Fenring's sinister hints at Fade's birthday, I think Shaddam isn't necessarily on board with Fade as the next Baron of House Harkonnen.
Yeah.
So I think Shaddam would boom, PR mode. He'd be like, oh my gosh, what a tragedy that these two great houses obliterated each other, neither of them having approved heirs. Oh, so sad. No successor name for House Harkonnen.
Right. So you're telling me Shaddam is not a fan of Fade's hip-thrusting rock and roll?
he's I'm gonna be the House Harkonnen because my name's Fade Rather. Yeah, Shaddam is the one that made the cameras go up so that they couldn't see the gyrating hips of Fade Rather.
Tilt up, tilt up, tilt up.
Tilt up quickly. He's seducing everyone.
I do wonder why the Shaddam didn't like Fade, or that he just didn't like Baron choosing an heir without his say so. I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine the fact that he doesn't like Leto, I imagine Shaddam is the sort of person who generally is fine with people who he finds are complicit with his power structure. And we've talked about how House Harkonnen kind of models what houses are supposed to do in the Landsrat. So, yeah, maybe he's actually super on board with Fade. But I definitely see him taking steps to make sure that House Harkonnen doesn't then become a threat, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So I think that would either happen as dissolving House Harkonnen's assets, like, great house, really old, but what are we going to do? Okay, so, this house, political favor, you get this, you get that.
Yeah.
Or, because he hadn't named anybody, I'm going to put someone on the House Harkonnen head of house that is a lapdog for me.
Right.
So that's the Carino response, I think, to both Baron and Leto, and presumably Jessica and Paul being dead.
Right.
Looking then at the Atreides troop, receiving the news of both Baron Harkonnen and Duke Leto's deaths would be Paul, Jessica, Gurney, and Thufir Hawat in their like respective locations. So I think they would immediately know, or maybe they already knew at this point, that there are Sardaukar on planet, that the Sardaukar were behind the attack. I don't know that they would feel as stuck in a corner without Baron Harkonnen on planet directing the Harkonnen troops and Harkonnen forces. So I propose that they would, as a family, meet up and then send a message to Shaddam saying, meet with us on our terms, or else we're going to tell the universe that you conspired to destroy a great house, that this is all you did this, which again, recall is like the thing Shaddam's like, this can't happen.
Yeah.
Now, I think Paul, Jessica, Gurney, and Thufir would leverage the Emperor's desire for secrecy to reclaim Caladan, especially because, like, I imagine rebuilding House Atreides, it would be useful to have Caladan back.
Yeah.
And also potentially leveraging the now probably very helpful Bene Gesserit, who are like, oh, sweet, Kwisatz Haderach plan, breeding program still viable. Let's help Jessica out however we can. I think they would claim Arrakis in permanent fief control. They'd say, you're just going to let this happen because otherwise we tell everyone.
Mm-hmm. So they leverage like the political knowledge that they have.
Yeah.
And they hold that over the Emperor, is what you're saying. What happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think between Paul, who's no, dim light bulb himself, Jessica, Thufir, Gurney, you have all of these like brilliant strategists. They would get a good deal out of this. As good a deal as possible.
I'm a bit confused. Are you saying that Thufir isn't captured in this scenario and that Gurney doesn't go with the smugglers and they meet up in the desert again?
Yeah, I think Thufir getting captured, I'm fairly certain he's captured by Sardaukar under Harkonnen directions.
Mm-hmm.
And with Baron Harkonnen dead, like I think if Baron Harkonnen died, the Harkonnen orders on planet would have hiccuped enough for Thufir and those Fremen to get away.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know for sure. I mean, obviously it's possible.
Right. They would probably be in more disarray after the Baron's untimely death.
That's my thought. Yeah.
I'm not sure, though, if just leveraging knowledge of the Emperor's involvement would be enough to bring him to the table in that regard.
Oh, sure.
But if, like, later, if they knew about the spice, where it came from, because the spice is just everything, and regardless of the political machinations, the spice must flow. So he would have to bend the knee to whatever they wanted, because that's greater than his political influence. The spice must flow.
Yeah.
So I do wonder that because I think in that tense exchange with the Baron and Fenring that you mentioned earlier, the Baron kind of alluded to him revealing that information or letting it come out. And Fenring said, well, I can just arrange for Sardaukar commanders to come forward and just admit to everything and acting without orders.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that just alone would be enough.
Interesting. True.
But if they somehow did learn or connected with the Fremen and did learn about the spice production and could leverage that in addition to that, that might work.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it. Like, I don't think Paul would be content with not exploring his prescient visions of Arrakis. Like, I think Paul would go back to Arrakis.
Yeah.
I think he would seek out this, super hot, beautiful woman that he keeps seeing in his dreams. He's like, I keep seeing Zendaya, and if there's a chance, I should probably explore that. They're like, you're really eager to go back to that desert. He's like, it's just, I was working on my tan, they're like, I don't know, you seem too excited about. Anyway, so I think Paul would end up back on planet, and I do think he would end up with the Fremen as part of exploring his prescient visions.
Yeah.
So I think you make a really good point, and you've changed my scenario a little bit, and I completely am on board with this new version. 2.0 launching right now is, you're right, they need more leverage. Paul thinks there's something in his prescient visions, explores time with the Fremen, discovers the spice connection. He who controls the spice controls the universe. We now control the universe, and if Shaddam is going to try to leverage all of the force of the Sardaukar, we can approach the Lancerad with this information and go, well, isn't it convenient, all of this stuff, and however he handled Harkonnen, House Harkonnen.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then I was thinking, like, does Paul still become the Kwisatz Haderach?
Right.
And I think yes, just kind of through his prescient visions of terrible things that might happen and stuff. I think he would be like, it's my responsibility to leverage this power and explore this. And I also think the Bene Gesserit would push him in that direction as well. Like, yeah, we want you to become the Kwisatz Haderach. But then I think he would probably, leverage his prescience to steer the universe in a more Bene Gesserit style manner. Like, I don't know, just through votes and through grassroots campaigns and a really shocking editorial novel that he writes that like blows,
scathing,
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He watches a TikTok
He would probably butt heads with the Bene Gesserit still, especially if he's going with...
For sure.
His lover, Chani, his destined love, and they don't like her because she's not in their breeding program. She would contaminate, as they would see it, the bloodline. So he would probably butt heads with them on that.
Yeah, guaranteed. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting how that would, if it still works out somewhat to their plans, they might be okay with it. Or they would just be forced to be okay with it.
Yeah, forced to be okay with it is the thing.
Yeah.
In the same way that they have to find that like ultimate lever to twist Shaddam, he would find that ultimate lever to twist the Bene Gesserit, because you're right. He would have to like stop them from trying to assassinate Chani, because they'd be like, cool. Yeah, we're going to kill her. Cool. And he's like, no. yeah. Cool. We love that. Love that for you. Hate that for us, but we love that for you.
Yeah. I have a question for you though, Leo.
Sure.
Does Paul become emperor in this version of events, or does he just become head of House Atreides?
For sure, head of House Atreides. I don't know how being emperor interfaces with like the golden path or the avoidance of.
Yeah.
That's the thing that would motivate like an adult Paul in an alternative universe, is he's seeing these terrible futures.
Yeah.
And he's seeing this choice that's being presented to him. And he's like, can I do it? Can't I do it? I can't do it because I love Chani too much. And then, as we see in Children of Dune, maybe Leto does end up taking the throne. But I don't know that it's that important for Paul, or was ever important for Paul, other than winning peace and protection for the people he loves and freeing the Fremen and all of that.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's a good question.
You think he could still achieve the golden path, or at least direct humanity in that way, even if he was just head of House Atreides?
I mean, if he's got the Bene Gesserit, even if they are unwillingly helping him, they are masters of moving the universe. So
That's true.
That's my thought.
Fun.
But that's my scenario. That's kind of how I think it would play out.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to go next? What do you think?
I'm happy to go next.
Oh, sure.
Because I actually find it really interesting that you immediately started considering what the Carino would do and how they would start interfering.
Sure.
And looking at Elaine's notes, Elaine sort of thought along those lines too. My mind actually instantly went to Fade assuming control of House Harkonnen, even at a young age, because I think at this time during the attack on Arcane, he's like 16-ish maybe.
Yeah.
But that's still old enough for him to take over the throne and become the new Baron of House Harkonnen. So I think if the Tooth situation happened and Baron Vladimir Harkonnen died, Fade Rotha would immediately maneuver to take over.
Yeah.
And obviously that involves a bit of butting heads with his brother, Beast Raban.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I don't think Beast Raban is cunning enough to outwit his younger brother.
For sure.
So Fade will either back him into a corner and force his hand, or simply kill him. I don't think Fade would be above doing that in order to take control of House Harkonnen.
I don't get a lot of brotherly love between the two throughout the
I don't
book.
either. I don't either. I do agree, however, that the disarray within House Harkonnen, right? Even this like changing of the hands and Fade assuming the throne in my scenario would still cause enough turmoil within House Harkonnen that it would give the Emperor lots of leverage over the events of Arrakis. And I almost imagine that the Emperor immediately sends his most trusted advisor, Count Fenring, back to Arrakis and says, hey, you're back in charge of this.
Yeah, right.
You know, because he was already there in a bit of an official imperial capacity to at least make sure that the Carinos were getting their taxes, their spice taxes and their spice allotments. And I think the Emperor would be like, well, the Harkonnens are in fucking disarray and this 16-year-old kid has just taken over. Count, go to Arrakis, make sure things are running properly. And make sure the Harkonnens and this young kid are doing their job.
Yeah.
I do think that Fade Rotha would be young and brash, and I think he would steer House Harkonnen in an even more destructive path on Arrakis. But I also think he'd be quite efficient, probably more efficient than Beast Raban. I don't imagine Beast Raban is like great at workflows, you know?
Yeah.
His
not Excel spreadsheets look awful.
They're a mess. Not even color coded.
Not even color coded.
I do think just based on Fade's intelligence and cunning and better training, right? He was very obviously being groomed to be the next Baron. I think he would manage Arrakis much more efficiently, if not more destructively, than his brother Beast Raban did during his time.
Yeah.
I also think he would actually spare no expense in going after the Fremen, and in particular going after this new rumored messiah he keeps hearing about called Muad'Dib.
Right.
Whereas the Baron and Beast Raban maybe ignored this threat, I think Fade would think of it as a challenge to his young baronhood, you know?
Yeah.
And he would go after him hard. And in my mind, that almost ends up being this like cat and mouse in the desert chase between Fade and the Harkonnen forces and Paul and his Fremen forces.
Yeah.
And this perhaps makes Paul's survival in the desert more difficult. And I like to think this would lead to a longer drawn out guerrilla war. Instead of that 2-year time jump we get in the first book, maybe this is like 5, 6, 7 years of just like ongoing bloodshed and war as Fade and Paul like duke it out with each other in the deserts of Arrakis.
Yeah.
I do think without the Sardaukar raid that takes place at the end of the book, and without the Emperor's interference, in an interesting twist, in my scenario, I imagine that Paul and Chani's first child actually survives. We get Leto the Elder, Leto the OG.
Yeah.
And I imagine he kind of grows up in this war-torn culture, right? He grows up in this like brutal desert environment at war with the Harkonnens from the minute he's born. This young child. And I imagine him becoming a very fierce warrior trained by both Paul, his Fedaykin, Stilgar, Jessica. You know, he gets all of the most brutal and best training. And this young Leto is like a savage, you know?
Yeah.
He's like a Tarzan.
Like kind of who Alia becomes in Messiah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do definitely imagine this Leto fighting alongside his father and his Fedaykin once he's old enough and battling the Harkonnen. So father and son sort of duking it out with Fade and the Harkonnen forces in the desert. To wrap up my scenario, I do think father and son, so Leto OG and Paul, probably would end up successfully overthrowing Baron Fade Rotha Harkonnen and would be able to reestablish House Atreides on Arrakis after a very long, drawn-out, bloody guerrilla war. And similar to your scenario, where maybe they go to the Emperor and use some political leverage, perhaps Paul and his son and Jessica and the remaining forces, Gurney's out there too with the smugglers, do go to the Emperor and they're like, hey, let us get rid of this impetuous young Baron for you and get rid of House Harkonnen. So maybe the Emperor helps the Fremen warriors as well.
Right.
Ultimately, I think the bigger question is, what does this mean for the Golden Path? Because at the end of the day, Paul is still having his visions, and he still has to prevent humanity's stagnation and the jihad. That's a little tougher to answer in my scenario because we've sort of veered off course so dramatically. But I do think father and son would be able to use their powers, because I think Leto OG would also inherit many of the same abilities.
Probably, yeah.
I think the two of them could actually kind of work together. Like, Paul wouldn't have to be the only prescient near godlike being in the galaxy and figure it out on his own. He would like compare notes with his son, perhaps. And maybe they would be able to steer humanity in the right direction using their powers together. Although, knowing the way Frank took his stories in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, I do imagine that like Paul and Leto OG would have to make some really sad and tough decisions along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but,
probably.
To me, this scenario turns it into like a very cool like father-son guerrilla warfare on Arrakis story. And in my mind, if the Baron dies, and that leads to like this domino effect. of events.
I like your scenario too when it comes to Fade and Beast. Although I do think Fade might keep Beast around for a bit, so to where he gets like familiar, because he's
interesting.
Yeah, he was never on Arrakis.
True.
But Beast was there for so long.
Right.
And actually the Baron kind of underestimated his views when it came to the Fremen. So Beast may have more of that freedom to go after the Fremen more as he wanted to, and what the Emperor kind of wanted also. But I think Fade would still, his classic narcissistic ambition, I think he would keep him around just long enough to where he would just be useful. And when he was done being useful, he would have him eliminated. And also kind of in keeping with what the Baron wanted anyways, was for the Beast to be the oppressor and Fade to be the savior. So I think that could have been really a neat opportunity to have their dynamic more, because they don't really interact that much.
Right.
At all, I don't think.
Right. If you don't read the context clues, I don't think it's ever even directly stated that they're brothers in the book. So, yeah, I love that. I love that scenario.
Yeah, more internal political intrigue between and House Harkonnen. That would have been neat. So I like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It would also give those characters a chance to be like more fleshed out characters, because they kind of exist as archetypical like forces to fight against, and they don't really. We kind of see Fade's agency throughout the book a little bit with like the attempted assassination and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, it'd be kind of fun to see him really genuinely like, oh shit, I'm in charge now.
Have him make decisions. I don't know.
Yeah. And we also see Baron not be a totally savvy political mastermind with that, again, that tense conversation with Fenring. So I wonder is Fade ready politically? And I wonder if he would be like, humiliated or humbled in some grand way, thinking, I fucking got this. Yo, I got that unearned confidence. He like shows up and Fenring's like, I don't know, puts him in a chokehold and is like, what are you doing, child?
Yeah. Again, he is 16, so it's like, how much experience does he really have in being in charge?
I like to imagine in your scenario, Abu, Alia would get to grow up with like a younger sibling.
Yeah.
Well, technically her nephew.
Right.
And then being able to have like a person to have a kind of childhood with versus her brother, the emperor of the universe that we see in Messiah.
Yeah.
Where they're close, often, of one mind and everything. But there's always that kind of distance where he's the one with the prescient powers and all this stuff versus her having having more of that kind of sibling experience could be really stabilizing for her and actually probably could have saved her.
Yeah.
Hanging out with her nephew.
Yeah.
We all want better for Aaliyah. She has such a tragic story.
So tragic. Elaine, I'm curious how you think events would play out if the Tooth successfully killed the Baron.
Yeah, and going off of probably both yours and Leo's comments about the Emperor stepping in and having Count Fenring run things, I think he would definitely do that, as he's his, right-hand man, and he did before, and he could just easily move him from Caladan back to Arrakis to stabilize things, be his eyes and ears and everything. But I do think the Emperor would want to enforce more control through Fenring. And I think that might complicate things. And it made me wonder, like, how would that complicate the Emperor's will as far as Fenring's will? Because he has a dual allegiance with the Sisterhood.
Right.
And he would likely want to do what's best to preserve both Fade's life and Paul's life. And so would that cause him to temper attacks on the Fremen? I mean, we know the Emperor wants them eliminated. He's long suspected their power.
Yeah.
But we know when it came down to it, Fenring chose the Sisterhood's plans. I mean, he himself is part of their breeding program. So
right. Yeah.
I think he would temper his approach, but I think in that he'd want to enforce more control. I think the Emperor would allow him that authority, especially with the Baron, eliminated. So he would have more authority there, and that would cause him to lessen, I guess, temper the attacks on the Fremen. And that act in itself would change so much, because Beast's brutality with the Fremen was a huge driving point. It emboldened the Fremen in their fight against their oppressors.
Yeah.
And it fed their zeal, solidified their resolve to attack them, that Paul could embolden them to rise up and unify to them. So if they don't have that, if it's a more tempered approach to them, I don't think they rise to that position of power that they would have before, that they're just this unstoppable force. So Paul and company, they do, like you said, return to Caladan. The Bene Gesserit would want that too, because again, Fenring's working for them as well. So they want both Fade and Paul to live.
Right.
Or at least be able to get their DNA so that they can preserve the bloodline.
True. Yeah.
So if there's a way for that to happen and the Emperor to still get what he wants, I think he would let them off Arrakis. As long as Atreides and Harkonnen houses are both significantly weakened,
True.
The Emperor
Very
gets
true.
his way.
Yeah.
And then the Bene Gesserit get their way as well, because they didn't want this conflict between the two houses to begin with, because it would risk the bloodlines being lost.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's a really cool scenario, and I think it definitely would lessen the Fremen's influence. So it's a definite drastic change to how the galaxy worked out. And then, who knows, everything's kind of more peaceful then, I guess. And if the Bene Gesserit continue to get their way, possibly Paul's offspring and Fade's offspring would produce another Kwisatz Haderach, and the Bene Gesserit get their way.
Whoa. Elaine, you cracked the code. Happily ever after.
Yeah. The status keeps quoing forever and ever.
I know. Y'all were more very detailed in how things would work out. But that itself really kind of clicked with me about, what if the Fremen don't become this formidable force in the galaxy?
Right.
More than the Sardaukar. So that would change things drastically. Yeah.
It's such a good reminder that Fenring works for the Emperor, but with his wife is very much an agent of the Bene Gesserit as well.
Right.
And like that's something that I didn't even consider. But you're right that like as soon as chaos erupts, the Bene Gesserit would employ any and all forces necessary to stabilize their plan, which includes the right-hand man to the Emperor. That's so interesting. Yeah, Fenring is definitely one of those key players that I think is so easy to forget, almost as if by design.
I also really like, Elaine, that you pointed out that the Emperor gets his way if this scenario happens.
True.
Because for him, the win-win scenario is House Atreides is weakened and House Harkonnen is weakened. He doesn't really care about some sort of feud between these two. All he cares about is making sure that the spice is protected, that he gets his spice, and that any threat to his throne is removed. And in the Dune book, as we know it, the threat is Duke Leto, the Atreides, and the troops that Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho have been training. Mm-hmm. But as you're saying, if the Baron dies, House Harkonnen is weakened and in disarray, House Atreides is devastated, and the Emperor's kind of like, okay, I'm done here. You know, he just like washes his hands of it. He's like, great, neither of these houses can threaten me. I'm good. Yeah. And perhaps he steps back and just lets Count Fenring run things on Arrakis. I like that. I think that's a really good point you made.
Yeah, really cool scenario. Very interesting things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to scenario number 2, because this is the one that I picked. So I'm the one that's super excited about it. I wanted to discuss with you two what would happen if Chani had survived childbirth in Dune Messiah and had lived to raise the twins later on in Children of Dune.
Interesting. So I want to toss this to you, Elaine. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So what if Chani has survived childbirth? I mean, it's such a wonderful idea. Again, we hope for the best for these characters, like we were saying with Aaliyah. We want the best for Aaliyah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we want the best for Chani. It was so tragic, her story in Dune Messiah. Very like Greek tragedy.
Yeah. But
her death is a catalyst for so many things.
True. Yeah.
It's a very significant event. And so
Right.
if Paul going into the desert, her death was a major factor in that. So I think he, with, her surviving childbirth, he doesn't leave her. He remains as the Emperor, doesn't go into the desert. And that in itself is kind of like a happier prospect. They're all like together, one family. Duncan is also there and just freshly with his memories. returned to them. So he never really got to spend that much time with Paul, or Hate did with Paul after his reawakening.
Yeah.
So that would have been such a nice start. Nice, happy family. Yeah. However, obviously there'll still be drama.
No, drama.
But it definitely would be interesting when it comes to the dynamic between Paul and Aaliyah. So with Paul remaining as emperor, Aaliyah never becomes regent. And also Paul going into the desert in the Fremen tradition, like that in itself cemented very much in the Fremen's eyes his mythical, legendary status.
Yeah.
And I think that in combination with Aaliyah, her cult of followers, spearheaded that movement.
Yeah.
So without that, with Paul there to kind of temper that, and her not having that position of power as well as the religious leadership, definitely we wouldn't see that as influential as we saw later in Children of Dune, and less drama.
Yeah.
Would that be as interesting though with less drama? I don't know.
I mean, listen, sometimes it's nice to read a just chill, peaceful book. I think you're absolutely right in that, like, there was a transference of godhood for, like, where Paul left this vacuum. All of the, like, followers of Paul were like, well, his holy sister remains. And you're right that, like, him remaining would absolutely temper that. That's a good point.
Yeah. And I think with Chani there, her physical presence, I think she would continue to voice her discontent with the softening of the Fremen culture as Arrakis transforms. So maybe Leto II appreciates that and uses that to convince his mother of the need to smash the Connaughts and set back those terraforming efforts. So
snap. That's great. Oh, I love that.
Because it's such an interesting moment of the Fremen. They're kind of disappearing.
Yeah.
Arrakis made them who they are. It was this culture of survival. It was the entire culture of the Fremen. So, yeah, seeing through Chani, like how it, or Chani, I'm sorry, I say both.
You're fine. I was going to say, our listeners are going to have to get used to hearing the names pronounced correctly. Right. Because we've just we've
whatever. Committed to our bad pronunciations, and we're not changing.
And we get emails like, periodically they're like, actually it's Mohiam, and it's like, no, it's Mohiam.
Well, Frank Herbert was completely fine with the different pronunciations. There's different pronunciations in David Lynch's version. He was fine with it. He's fine.
That's right.
He's chill.
Yo, I didn't know he was chill like that. Hell yeah.
Anyway, so I think her being there would also have more of the contribution about like the Fremen culture.
Yeah.
I think that would be a very interesting viewpoint from her to continue with that. But also just her presence is so stabilizing and supportive in Paul's life. She, of course, would continue to do that, continue with that with the twins. It was with the twins. I mean, they did, especially Ganima was very important, but it was all in her, within her, the ego presence of her mother in her mind. But her physical presence being there, I'm sure would be probably add to that even more, of that stabilizing force. So they likely would still have avoided abomination, but also with just maybe less challenges.
Yeah.
Having that stabilizing force of the entire family together, just support from both their parents, and of course the twins having each other. That in itself was very instrumental to manage their preborn nature. So I think it would just be more stable. Again, probably less drama within their
fewer lousy tigers in their lives, maybe.
Yeah.
How many fewer? Are we talking like one fewer or two fewer?
And perhaps again, if we all want the best for Aaliyah, perhaps with this stable family-ish, Aaliyah could possibly avoid possession with her brother still there.
Right.
I think she felt really abandoned by everyone.
Right.
She needed her family too. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
True.
Totally.
But yeah, so hopefully we get a happy end for Aaliyah in that scenario.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the golden path, because that's a huge thing, I don't think Paul would walk the golden path still. Yeah, I think he would still avoid the golden path. He's still dealing with the ramifications of the jihad in his name. So I think he's still pretty bummed out about that. And he already has the lives of billions weighing on him. So I don't think he would have it in him still, even with Chani there, to walk that path again that would lead to such tyrannical rulership and death and destruction that path would require.
Right.
Would Leto still see the need to do that? Maybe.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
I agree. Because again, he's still got that Fremen side in him from his mother.
Right.
That sort of Fremen brutality and practicality to do what must be done.
Yeah. Also, and he hadn't met someone like Chani yet, right?
Yeah.
Like he has that moment with Sabiha in Children of Dune, but like still, he didn't have the unbreakable desire to be with someone that like Paul has with Chani. So here's a question. Do we think that Paul would still be fully blind? Because technically that happens at the moment of the twins' births, because that's the moment he knows that the visions have split off.
Oh, that's interesting.
Although, ignore me, because no, he wouldn't, because even the preacher after his full blindness
I was just gonna
could
say that.
still see. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say in Children of Dune, he still clearly hints at like poking into prescience and looking at things.
So, okay, never mind. He has a period of temporary blindness with the shock of having 2 kids, and then he's back to flying ornithopters and grabbing telephones from people's hands mid-conversation and all that fun stuff.
Well, I think in Elaine's series of events, like Paul's godhood becomes even more godly because now he's this like holy blind god that flies ornithopters by himself.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think he grows even bigger. His influence over the Fremen and his godliness probably just overshadows, as Elaine, you were saying, like Alia's influence definitely is undercut because her brother is still there. He is still the Messiah, still the chosen one.
Yeah.
And now he's blind, which is, in many religions is always equated with even more holiness.
Yeah. He just gets more and more mopey, though. So, 10 years later, he's, dragging his arms on the floor, and he's like, this religion, I hate it.
Have you heard of Slipknot?
Have you... Stilgar, what's your favorite band on 3? 1, 2, 3, Slipknot. Oh, my God. Whoa.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you predict would happen, Elaine.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty accurate to how I think events would take place, too. What about you, though, Leo?
I mean, listen, I agree a lot with what Elaine said, and a lot of what I wrote is the same. I think if Chani survived, Paul wouldn't go out into the desert, which means Leto and Ganima would have had actual parents and not memory ghost parents, Casper, the friendly parental figures. And that's huge because, again, recall that even the other memories, as helpful as they were, are frozen at the moment of conception. And how much did Chani grow and learn from the moment that she conceived the twins to the moment of delivering them and then beyond? And same thing for Paul, where Paul is a very different person by the time of Children of Dune and the kids are 12 or whatever, 9, 10, he's a very different person. So having that different voice to kind of have a conversation with would be very different. I think the first years of the twins would be pretty quiet. I think Paul would continue to rule, exactly like you said, Elaine, as this sort of eyeless emperor who's this, his mythology is growing rapidly. I also like the idea of him using baby vision more times, looking through the eyes of his son Leto.
I didn't even think of that.
So he's wearing one of those baby Bjorns with his baby son on his chest. And he's like, before you fucking lie to me again, look into the eyes of my baby and tell me that. And they're like, ew, it's looking at me. What the fuck is happening? Did your baby just wink at me?
Incredible.
Paul's like, maybe. Maybe he did.
Very smart baby.
He's a very smart baby. Baby's like, you shouldn't take this deal, Dad. It's not a... I checked my Excel spreadsheet, color-coded.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't take this deal. So I like that idea. It's like a go-go gadget trick, he's got baby vision. I don't think that Alia would fall to abomination. And for similar reasons, I think that Paul's leaving really left her alone. And she kind of was trying anything to have the prescience that he had, which involved crazy amounts of spice, which generally is not super good of an idea for Atreides people. And we see Ganima and Leto too being oh yeah, no, we avoid spice generally because it's really risky. It's really dangerous. I think she would have had a normal-ish life as a like high priestess of Paul's religion, as Saint Alia of the Knife.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd just continue working with that sword dummy thing and enjoying a happy marriage with Duncan Idaho. Also, a sword dummy in many ways. I think Leto would have started to have prescient visions about when we see him having prescient visions in Children of Dune. So probably at around like 9, he has dreams that come true. And I think at that point, he would start becoming cognizant of the Golden Path. And I think he would, and with the Fremen brutality and pragmatism, I think he would be like, yeah, this needs to happen. But with Paul's more stable and more present, I think it would be more of a dialogue between father and son. And I think that like it would be many conversations, many times they would talk. And I think eventually Paul still wouldn't, even saying, hey, do you see this shit that I'm seeing? And Leto's like, yeah, Dad, sorry to tell you. I see the same terrible season 7 of that TV series.
Yeah.
And Paul's like, oh no.
How do we avoid it?
So I think Paul still wouldn't have the courage to do it. And I think Leto still would. So then it would just be a matter of Leto convincing Paul that it should happen, or failing to convince Paul until Paul dies of natural causes. And then I think Leto would sort of take over the reins as a young man and probably start the sand trout skin thing that we see in Children of Dune.
Yeah.
Post Paul dying.
Right. Perhaps later in his life than 9.
Yeah, exactly. And that maybe then he would have a chance to like have a bit of a normal like teenage year period, like that could be cool. Another big difference here, I think, is at the end of Children of Dune, Ganima is pretty much the only person in the Atreides bloodline able to have kids. So that kind of falls on her. And at the end of Children of Dune, she's like 12. She's like 11. And she's like, gonna have a lot of kids. And It's like, oh, that sucks. That shouldn't fall on your shoulders squarely. So I do imagine Alia's still around, able to have kids if she wants to, Maybe Paul and Chani have another kid. I don't know. They're still young. They're still banging, as we see multiple times in Messiah. So anyway, that's my general sense, is a lot of the same stuff that Elaine said, and then added hilarity of baby vision and look into my baby's eyes and tell me that.
Yeah, love it.
Anyway, that's my take. Abu.
Yeah.
Wrapping us up on this this scenario, what do you think? Episode 2. Dune What If Chani survives childbirth.
I agree with basically everything both of you have said. So I think what I'll do, instead of reiterating the things that I do agree with, I'm going to diverge a little bit and talk about some interesting differences that I think would take place from the series of events that you two have laid out. I think if Chani lived to raise the twins, I agree that Paul would continue as emperor, but I don't think his relationship with Leto would be smooth for their entire lives. Because they butt heads as the preacher and a 9-year-old wormy boy in Children of Dune.
Right.
And Leto full on says, I'll kill you if I have to. And I imagine they would similarly butt heads when it came time to have the hard conversations about the Golden Path. Because Paul is not ready to commit to it. Paul loves Chani. Paul loves his family. He's not ready to make those sacrifices. He doesn't necessarily have the grit, the Fremen grit that Leto does to make those choices. Plus, Leto is younger, hasn't fallen in love yet, doesn't really have any attachments outside of Ganima to sort of hold him back from making the sacrifices.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's almost a scenario here where Leto has to overthrow or discredit his father in order to take over, to maybe shoot down Muad'Dib's godhood and declare himself the true god, the true messenger, whatever, so that he can take over and finally steer humanity down the golden path that Paul perhaps is avoiding because he doesn't want to or can't. I do think early on, Chani's presence and having like a parental presence in general would make the twins' lives easier and would ultimately protect Alia from succumbing to abomination. Because again, as we've discussed before, she'd have that family unit.
Right. Yeah.
And they're a very weird family at this point, like looking into past, present, future, everything. But they can at least compare notes and talk amongst each other. So I think the twins' lives are easier and Alia doesn't succumb to abomination. for many years, but ultimately I think there comes a point where Leto has to disrupt everyone's lives and overthrow his father and in almost like a very Shakespearean way, take the throne by force. Because Paul won't do what has to be done. He doesn't have the gumption. And Leto's like, Dad, we got to do some real bad shit. And if you won't do it, then I have to.
I really like that. It definitely adds that drama and tension.
Yeah.
As we were talking about before, everything kind of seems so tidy and neat, and it's not really that interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, true.
This is not a neat and tidy universe. It makes it interesting when we see conflict, and I think the conflict that you were spelling out with between Paul and Leto II, especially if he feels the need to just like discredit him or overthrow him, that sounds so interesting. Mm-hmm. And I think that definitely could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would definitely make for some juicy like family drama situation. Because I think another layer to this is Chani.
I was going to say, yeah.
She's still around. She's still the mother figure in all of this. And now, if Leto and Paul are feuding about the future of humanity, she's stuck in this awkward middle ground. Mm-hmm. On one side, there's the love for her children. But on the other side, there's the love for her life partner and the father of her children, right, and her wanting to protect both. So I almost imagine a scenario where we, the reader or the viewer, are left wondering, like, will she, won't she? You know, like, who is she going to side with? Is she going to side with Paul? Is she going to side with Leto? How much of the golden path does she even believe, right? Because in Dune Messiah, Chani's just kind of like, there's Paul again doing his weird vision shit. I guess I believe him. But she also feels some frustration where Paul is so distant and says shit like, you know, our child will have an empire greater than mine. And she's like, can we just eat dinner, please?
Yeah.
So there is like this question of like, where does Chani land in all of this drama?
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, I think just to wrap up, I think this series of events leads to like a really juicy story that's like full of court intrigue and court drama and like a family torn apart. You know, it's almost like a house divided because you start to think, okay, but who do the attendants like Gurney and Thufir and Duncan, who do they start siding with, right? If the house divides down the middle between Paul on one side and Leto on the other and them butting heads, maybe Duncan's like, yeah, man, I agree with Paul. I'm on his side. So I almost imagine like this schism taking place within House Atreides in this series of events.
At least they had a few good years.
Right. They have like a good 9 to 10 years at the start.
Yeah.
And then this whole Golden Path shit starts happening.
And then drama. Yay.
Gurney formally marries Jessica, gives
shit!
her the husband. And then it's like, oh, stepdad Gurney, and I'll sing you a song. You know, it's like, oh, dad, stepdad. Okay. So, okay, a tonal question.
Yeah.
So, family drama. We can get a showrunner from one of two shows.
Okay.
Either Succession or Arrested Development.
Wow, that's a tough tonal question.
Yeah.
But it's an easy answer for me. I love Succession. And yeah, like imagine a Succession-style House Atreides drama with the family torn apart. And what's in the balance is the future of humanity.
Ali is selling ecstasy at the club again. Oh, God.
Arrested Development.
Well,
that's my choice.
Okay, that's your choice? Yeah. That's a perfectly
Gurney's
valid
like,
route to
I
go
blew
too.
myself.
Or maybe for the first few years, and then as it gets serious.
Right.
Succession.
Yeah.
That would be such a crazy experience to watch like a family drama show and to have showrunners from Succession handle like the final episodes and the first episodes are handled by showrunners of Arrested Development. Oh,
amazing. My God. So that's how I imagine this scenario would play out with Chani still being alive. Perhaps a series of events that eventually tears House Atreides apart.
That's really cool.
Amazing.
It's fun to think about.
Very, very cool. Well, that's our second scenario done. We're going to hop into our third scenario right after a quick break.
Oh.
So think about which showrunners you want on your what if scenarios, and we'll be right back right after this.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's talk about our third and final scenario today. This one, Elaine, was you. So I'll let you do the honors. What's our third scenario?
Okay, so what if Leto survived and escaped into the desert with Paul, and Jessica was killed in the attack on Arrakeen?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay. So I'd love to hear, this is the scenario that you picked, Elaine, so I'd love to hear your take. How would the events of the book go if that was the case? What do you think?
Okay, so I guess I could pose this question to you. So it kind of, there's a series of questions and events that would unfold. So if Leto escapes into the desert with Paul, would that mean that Leto would have been challenged by Jameis or some other Fremen? And if so, could Leto beat a Fremen in a duel?
Oh, shit.
So he was 51, but he was very vital. Vital, is that the right word? Very healthy. 51. Yeah. And he was also the leader of the most capable military force in the Imperium. Obviously, it was rivaling the Emperor Sardaukar. So he's definitely, there would be value in that for the Fremen. They would recognize the strength of Leto, I think. He already had, was establishing some good relations with them already, which is why they even had, Stilgar even recognized, or that Liet told him to protect these two.
Yeah.
Right.
Bought them a place among the Fremen. So
I was going to say, because Jameis picks the bone with Stilgar's decision to keep Jessica alive, and then, or was Jameis eager? I'm trying to remember Jameis's motivations and try to transplant them onto this scenario, because I do think that, Stilgar, to your point, has been told the Duke and his son are important. And there was a certain sense of okay, so I'll protect the boy, but the mother, she's a liability. Whatever, she can, we'll kill her. But would Jameis have challenged them at all? I gotta say, I do think that Leto would be the sort of Duke to have coaching lessons with Gurney and Duncan on the side. I don't see him as being I don't ever need to fight ever. I think he'd be I'm in there because if I'm capable in a conflict, am able to handle myself well, that cultivates bravura, that demonstrates to my men that I'm not just all talk. I think he's the sort of leader to be a little bit more in the gym with his bros. Let's lift iron for House Atreides. But I don't know.
Yeah. Has Paul received the best training as well, and for what purpose?
True.
So because of assassination attempts.
Right. True. Yeah.
So it's so prevalent among the nobles. So I think he would. As well. And
wow, do we think Duke Leto is shredded underneath that uniform?
Yeah, I think so.
Looks fit.
We already know he's hot, but he's I think he's probably shredded.
And again, I think it speaks to also that he's almost the exact opposite of the Baron.
Right.
So where the Baron is just this overly indulgent, narcissistic, he embodies everything that Leto isn't. Leto is smart, intelligent, and disciplined. So, I think he'd be fit for that reason.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But would they even see the necessity to challenge him at that point? I think I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's my thought too. I don't even know if a challenge would happen. But that's
because
really
maybe
interesting
Jameis just felt personally offended that this tiny woman bested him. He just first encountered Bene Gesserit, so maybe that kind of threw him off. What did he say, that there was witchcraft at work in a Tiano Basin, or where they found them? I think that his pride was kind of at work there.
Yeah. Also getting disarmed by Paul and he's like a Mala pistol in the bush or whatever.
Paul? Okay, then maybe not.
But that's the thing. It's even that moment bursting out into violence was partially precipitated by the fact that Stilgar was we'll protect Paul, but we're not going to protect Jessica. And then that was the violence. And if it had been Paul and this Duke who so quickly wins over Fremen by being a very direct, very honest guy.
Yeah.
Liet liked him.
Yeah, Liet liked him.
That could have bought him significant influence, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe it just would have been a peaceful walk to Siege Tabur. They're you two are chill. Cool. Yeah, come along.
Just some shaking of hands.
Yeah. So in that regard, if that initial meeting went smoothly, then would Leto have been the one to help form the Fremen into an even more lethal and effective force? Because they would still see Paul maybe in a different light. Similar, but maybe not as fervently so as in the beginning. They would see the signs in him, I think, but Jessica was a significant factor in the almost immediate acceptance of him. There were still some lingering doubts that were settled later on, but yeah, her presence and obviously becoming Reverend Mother was a significant factor in that regard. So without that, would it just be different dynamics then? Less the religious side, but maybe like a balance of that, of just fighting against the Harkonnens and just aligning with them as he intended to do, versus the religious reasons behind it. So maybe there's more of a balance there.
Yeah, because to your point, Jessica is very much playing the Bene Gesserit Missionaria Protectiva card the entire time that they're in the desert. And so in order to survive and be accepted among the Fremen, they are leaning into the whole Messiah bit.
Yeah.
But if Jessica's not there and they're not leaning into the whole Bene Gesserit religious manipulation, perhaps it is just a straightforward political, practical negotiation with a duke.
Yeah.
And the Fremen are like, let's work with this duke.
I think they would still see him as the possibility of their Mahdi, because at the very least they know that he's a son of the Bene Gesserit.
Right.
And they knew that from the very beginning, from their arrival. So they at least knew that.
Yeah, like shout out confirmed. Like, oh yeah, for sure.
So they at least would know that might be enough. And with his awakening prescience, that could be enough. So at the very least, he rises to a place of great influence, but with Leto also serving as that authority figure. So that's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
But then it's kind of tragic to think about poor Leah. So if Jessica dies, Leah isn't born.
Oh, yeah.
So what does that mean for the Baron? Does the Baron still die?
Oh.
He's obviously not going to die in the same way, but...
Right. There's no meet my Atreides Gamjabar uncle.
Grandfather,
sorry.
Oh, yeah.
It was salt in the wound that she was like, meet the Atreides Gamjabar nephew, and he's like,
oh, wait, what?
Fucking what?
You're a child.
Right before he died.
I'm your grandpappy. Show me some respect.
Utterly confused.
Yeah, that's a great question, Elaine. Without Alia, what happens in that series of events with the Baron?
I think that nothing might change in that regard, especially at that point. I mean, at that point in the story, the climax of the story, the Emperor's kind of taking charge anyways.
Yeah. He
might have put him to death or exiled him or just had him charged with treason or something if he wanted to make it more official.
Right.
But ultimately, it probably doesn't matter. If the Baron lives or dies at this point, the Fremen are unbeatable.
Right. Under Leto and Paul at this point.
Yeah, they would still have the training from both Leto and Paul. So, yeah, I think they'd still be just as formidable.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
But with him, after their victory on Arrakis, would Leto get the upper hand and be installed as emperor, realizing the Emperor's greatest fear?
Oh, self-fulfilling prophecy for House Carino.
I like that.
I do love that part. I do wish that would be awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because like every time in these like what if, it's like I find myself being pulled gravitationally towards scenarios that make my favorite characters happier.
Yeah,
I'm like, and then Leto finds a $5 bill underneath his like pair of pants he hasn't worn in a while. He's like, whoa, a winning lottery ticket. Whoa.
Right. I was just gonna make that joke. He scratches off like a lotto ticket and gets $100.
Hey,
he's not playing the big lotto. He's not an idiot. He's playing the scratch off like $20.
Calculated risk. Yeah.
That's so funny too, because as we were talking about the family dynamics, if Chani lived and everything and everyone's kind of happy for a bit, it kind of made me wonder, well, if that changed with the adversity, what if the adversity and the challenges were the thing that made the difference in the twins avoiding abomination?
Ooh.
There's that thing. Yes, we want everything to work out, but what if it's those tragic events that shape them?
Oh.
Yeah, how much is the Amtal necessary to make them who they are?
It's almost as if Amtal is the core theme of the Dune universe, or whatever the thesis of that last episode we did together was.
Before the course of this exercise, my what if scenario, has a nice ending for Leto.
Yeah.
No, I think it could work out as well as logistically, because that is a legit fear that the Emperor had. If Leto is still around, I think he's very savvy, very smart. So I think, again, he could get the Landsrat behind him. And as long as they get the spice, as long as the spice flowing, Spacingale don't care who's Emperor.
Yeah. True.
Right.
True.
Agreed. It's funny how in all of these scenarios, it's like whoever brokers peace with the Fremen immediately wins.
Right.
Wins the galactic game, because sure enough, whoever controls the spice controls the universe. That is the ultimate lever if you know how to pull it. And as long as Paul is alive, someone will figure out how to pull that lever.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
I love that. I love this scenario of Emperor Leto.
Emperor Leto
climbing the
golden throne.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. The golden hawk throne.
Ooh. I don't know.
All screech, the Emperor is here.
Doesn't have the same ring on it.
Yeah, that's true.
Golden
That's
hawk throne.
But
that's
it would
okay.
be
We're figuring out the
dope-
branding. That's still, we'll figure it out.
Back to the
Workshopping
whiteboard for his brand logo.
But with Leto now as Emperor, like, how will that change, like, the dynamics of still, like, Paul and the Fremen's relationship? So would the jihad still happen if Leto is the one installed as Emperor?
Oh.
Interesting. Yeah.
And if there's still some of their acceptance of him, of Paul, as their Mahdi. So if the Fremen are granted sovereignty over Arrakis and Paul is like, could still be their leader, that could be his fief. Obviously, Leto's in charge. I'm sure he would do that.
Yeah.
If that's what Paul wants. Obviously, he's with Chani, so it would make sense for him to have the fief of Arrakeen under Leto's authority. Arrakis could still be transformed into that green planet, so that could be a significant factor in still seeing Paul as the Mahdi. How that will factor into the jihad, I don't know. Still working that out. But they would still preserve the spice flow. So again, as long as that's going, everything's fine. And eventually, maybe Paul and Chani's offspring still might see the need for the Golden Path. Still see that. It's always there. Lingering over everything, the Golden Path.
Yeah.
Right. And you would imagine in that scenario, Leto would eventually step down and give the throne to Paul. So Paul perhaps rises to become emperor regardless, maybe just on a later timeline than he does in the actual book.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember even the like core fire of the jihad. And I think part of it was just making the universe bow down to this new emperor and quashing rebellions, basically. And dethroning false prophets and false gods, and, you know, like that sort of thing is what drove the jihad. And so, like, if Paul were made emperor, and then, you know, you have this period of time where Jessica's like, hey, in your next, like, universal address, Leto, can you, like, kind of mention that there might be a savior at some point? And he's like, okay, whatever.
Right.
And then they soften the universe to this idea, and then they don't have to have the jihad. Like, yeah, I could see there being no jihad with all of that considered.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I wonder if Paul himself then would walk the Golden Path without that weight of the jihad.
I don't know. I still think it's his attachment to Chani. I also do wonder if, like, kind of your point about the twins, maybe the twins had to see Alia fall to abomination for them to fully understand the risk and to avoid it themselves. Maybe the Golden Path is only possible by Paul's kid because Paul would choose not to follow the Golden Path. And also I always think about the fact that, like, Paul is kind of a generation early, and Leto's abilities, Paul acknowledges in Children of Dune, are, like, far greater than his own. So someone like Leto is necessary to walk the Golden Path, and although Paul could have tried, it's possible it just would have always fallen on his kid at some point. I don't know. I think that would have to be Leto. I don't think Paul could do it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Very Anakin, Luke, chosen one. Like, if Paul is our Anakin,
chosen one.
Luke is still the one to bring balance.
Leto 2's famous entry line, "Hello there," as he, like, throws the giant door down and everyone spins and turns and "Hello there."
Yeah, taken directly from Dune, I'm told.
Yeah.
So I agree actually with a lot of what Elaine said. My series of events in this situation where Jessica is the one that dies and Leto is the one that survives with Paul out in the desert, is very similar. I also question what would take place in that showdown with Stilgar and Jameis, because as I said earlier, Jessica plays such a critical role in Paul's journey in becoming the Messiah within the Fremen. She literally becomes their reverend mother, right? Joins a sacred part of their culture, which just continues to help cement the myth of the Missionaria Protectiva.
Right.
Leto, obviously not Bene Gesserit, knows nothing about the Missionaria Protectiva, and thus, wouldn't know the right, religious things to say to convince the Fremen or to convince people like Stilgar who believe in this Messiah. I don't think Leto's out here, citing scripture in the way that Jessica does a couple of times in key moments in the actual story. I also don't think Leto would go toe-to-toe with Stilgar, because Leto doesn't know the weirding way. And despite how shredded he may be, he's still a duke, and I still don't think he'd be able to stand up to someone like Stilgar in a one-to-one tussle situation. So I think the Tiano Basin confrontation would play out dramatically differently, and I agree with Elaine that I think it would actually be less confrontation and more just shaking of hands and oh, you're the Duke, you're important, let us protect you, let's create some sort of alliance. I don't think it would end in a Jameis-Paul showdown like it does in the real story. I do think this then leads into a much more political story than a religious one.
Yeah.
Because if Leto and Paul are the ones surviving out in the desert, they are going to be playing more of a political game with the Fremen, akin to what Leto originally wanted to do when they arrived on Arrakis, right? Form an alliance, utilize the Fremen, defeat our enemies, spring the trap.
Desert power.
Desert power, exactly. I think they would go all in on desert power if it was father and son out in the desert. And I think for a few reasons that would work really well. I mean, Stilgar and Leto have obviously already met at this point in the story, and Stilgar begrudgingly respects this Duke because it turns out he's cool and he spits really well on the table.
Yeah.
And so, at the very least, he'd be open to an alliance. I think he would actually be pretty gung-ho about it, too. I think rather than Paul becoming a messiah, though, I think this series of events might actually lead him to becoming just sort of an influential fighter, and perhaps even a warlord is maybe the wrong word, but higher up within the ranks. Maybe he does get his own Fadakin sort of hit squad because he's so talented and skilled, and because Duke and Paul train the Fremen so much. I think Paul becomes influential, but I don't know that he becomes full-on god, at least during their time out in the desert, just because I don't think that's the route they'd be going with the Duke there. I do agree that Leto and Stilgar would unify the Fremen under the Atreides banner. They'd form an alliance. Paul and Leto would train them, and thus the Fremen forces would be able to overthrow the Harkonnen.
Yeah.
And maybe reveal the Emperor's deception in all of this. So I think the attack on Arrakeen still happens at the end. The Baron still dies. And Leto climbs the throne, just as Elaine said. I actually really like that image of Paul ruling Arrakis as the local governor. That's his fiefdom. He's there married to Chani. And Leto is reporting up to as the emperor of the entire galaxy. I also think, in this instance, I'm not sure that Paul's powers fully awaken. I do think he's still having prescient visions, because obviously there's still spice intake, but I don't think he goes into the coma. I don't think he takes the water of life, because that series of events really happens because of Jessica's influence and because of Jessica's knowledge and the water of life ceremony and all of that.
Right.
So I think Paul is still struggling with visions at this point, but is not a full-on Super Saiyan Kwisatz Haderach, because he didn't undergo that coma situation.
Yeah.
And I think it really is up to Paul and Chani's children to become the real Kwisatz Haderachs, if it ever gets to that point. Because the devious drama side of me also wonders, what are the Bene Gesserit up to, right? They're watching all of this take place.
Yeah.
What if they are wait a second, you are the Emperor's son, Paul Atreides. You are so important to our plans. You can't just go marry a Fremen.
Right.
We're not going to allow you to tarnish our breeding plans and to ruin our carefully laid plans to breed you and to create the Kwisatz Haderach. So I think Paul is actually probably struggling in this series of events. He's probably struggling a lot with Bene Gesserit assassination attempts against Johnny and propositions from the Bene Gesserit for him to marry the correct person. And blah, 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 blah. You know, I think there becomes quite a bit of intrigue in Paul's life. As like the ruler of Arrakis, not only is he the one managing the spice, but he is also critical to the Kwisatz Haderach plans. I don't think he becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, but I think he becomes critical in creating the Kwisatz Haderach. And so that potentially leads to a lot of interesting scenarios.
I was going to ask, so I had this thought. I didn't even consider this when I wrote my response to this. Do you think the Bene Gesserit would send a new Bene Gesserit sister to Leto?
I think so. I think they would certainly try.
I agree. I think they would send someone immediately. I think they'd be like, Jessica's dead? Oh, shit. Like, we have this agent that is a byproduct of 10,000 years of work out in the desert. No, we need a Bene Gesserit by
someone
his
on the
side.
inside. Yeah.
And then maybe she, through her savviness, realizes it's not like a seduce him and then you're back on track. It's like a be an advisor to Leto because this terrible thing has happened and he's grieving the loss of Jessica. And then she can also like guide Paul or like kind of get Paul back on board.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Bene Gesserit are much more involved in this scenario. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if it would be Irulan.
Oh my God.
Oh, shit!
The Emperor did think about that at one time.
Yeah.
But because he was a little older, I think that was the reason.
Wow. Jinx. Yeah, crazy.
Or maybe because, are they all, I'm trying to think if they're all Bene Gesserit trained. All of the...
They're not all Bene Gesserits.
But Irulan definitely is. And I think it would just be another marriage in name only or title only. Because I don't think Leto really loved Jessica.
Yeah.
But
totally.
I think also he would be open to it for the political side of things. Same way as Paul was.
Yeah, definitely.
I was also thinking, I don't know that he would be that resistant to reciting scripture. It's clearly not in his wheelhouse, but he hires propagandists. And so if he had a savvy Bene Gesserit next to him going, listen, this is just another type of propaganda. You don't understand why it's going to work, but it's going to work. Like you say these words the next time you're talking to your men, to the Empire, you know, to whoever, and it's going to resonate with people in a way that you won't fully grasp. But like, trust me, try it, see what happens. And I feel like he'd be like, okay, I don't like doing this, but this is a lever to pull, and I know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Having a Bene Gesserit by Duke Leto's side, and perhaps having it even be Irulan, opens a whole other can of worms.
I know it does.
That's so interesting.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very cool. Well, Leo, what do you think? What do you think takes place if Leto and Paul end up in the desert instead of Jessica and Paul?
Yeah. I think for this, it's I mean, again, super interesting scenario. Thank you, Elaine, for setting my mind ablaze with all these possibilities. I think, and to be clear, I think we're all kind of in alignment that this is Baron Harkonnen's alive as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because obviously, like no tooth
scenario,
no
tooth scenario,
no Yui,
yeah.
no, all that stuff. So I would say that Leto and Paul getting out of this political trap that House Harkonnen and House Carino have set for him gives them kind of a trump card politically. And you're right, Elaine, from earlier that there is a certain like plausible deniability that they can just say, oh, the Sardaukar commanders did their own thing. But I think someone like Leto, who commands as much charisma and popularity within the Landsraad, is a real threat to House Carino alive still.
I agree with that.
So a little bit to be kind of spicy, I wanted to explore this one narrative possibility, which is that Leto and Paul meet up with Stilgar's troop.
Mm-hmm.
I do kind of imagine Jameis, if it did come to blows, I imagine Jameis still challenging. And I do see Duke Leto being like, it is important for my son to earn this. And I believe that he can do this. He's got this, I believe him letting that play out could happen. Also, as we've joked about Abu, Paul's this fucking pasty off-worlder claiming to be the Lisan al-Gaib.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, fuck that guy. Also, we know Jameis hates people with boring-ass names. He just got finished killing a Fremen named Jeff. He's like,
yeah.
What's this kid's name? Paul? Oh, fucking hold me back, bro. Hold me back. This kid's going down. Like, so I imagine maybe that happens. Paul kills him, as he does, and is named Usul of Siege Tabur. This is also House Atreides gaining from an alliance. And although Leto is despondent over Jessica's death, lost the love of his life, he puts on a strong face throughout all of this. I think that Paul and Leto would get off planet.
Oh.
And I was picturing, they're presumed dead as they were when they met up with Stilgar and everything. And I imagine it's a Landsraad council and they're going, oh my God, it's so tragic. We really liked Duke Leto, and the fact that he died, and oh, that's so sad. And Baron Harkonnen's being such an asshole about it. He's bragging. And then the doors get kicked open. Yeah. and he busts in, fog machines, full blast, just trumpets blaring. Ba-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And Leto's like, what up? It's your boy. Leto Atreides. And they're like, oh my God, it's John Cena. It's Leto Atreides. So, and I imagine him like presenting facts, like maybe he stayed out in the desert with the Fremen long enough to gather some like Sardaukar uniforms. Maybe they intercept a distrans. They like get the
receipts.
The receipts. He brings receipts and he's like, yo, Landsraad, here's what fucking happened. And they're like, yeah, you do look dusty and kind of sweaty. And he's like, no time for a shower. I came straight here. So he reveals in this incredible entrance the Carino plot, brings receipts. Maybe he even drags in Captain Otto Aramsham, the Sardaukar captain that gets captured by Paul and the other people, who's hiding with the smugglers. And the Landsraad votes to end the Golden Lion dynasty. I think the House Carino is ousted.
Wow.
And with this new political vacuum, who's the most popular dude who's also now like a recent victim of political intrigue? I think our boy, ya boy, Leto, gets voted in by the Landsraad as the new emperor of the universe. He takes up his throne, and then he banishes House Carino, the remaining members, back to Seleucus Secundus. Now, I do like to think that Paul, in his like emergent prescient abilities and putting two and two together about the Sardaukar are almost certainly a byproduct of how harsh it is in Seleucus Secundus, I imagine Paul is like, we should make that like a garden planet. And Leto's like, fucking what? Why? He's like, no, like, trust me. And he's like, okay, I'll spin it well. And he says, okay, we're going to make it nice so it's not as bad of a punishment. We're not sending him to a prison planet. We're sending him to like a nice garden place. It's going to be sweet. Like before, I think that Paul does return to Arrakis. He explores his dreams of Zendaya. He's like, listen, Dad, I gotta go. I gotta go for reasons you understand, I'm sure. And I think he perhaps properly marries Chani because his political power is not going to be as questioned because Leto's emperor already. It's not like he doesn't have to marry Irulan. So it's like, okay, might as well. And I also think that Leto would probably declaw House Harkonnen somehow. And yeah, generally that's kind of how I see it playing out. A lot of the same things that I think y'all have highlighted so far.
Yeah. I like your take that they would get off planet.
Yeah.
Instead of embedding with the Fremen. That's interesting. Because now that you say that, I do realize Duke Leto Atreides is kind of an important guy, and he would have enough leverage to go to the smugglers and be like, get me the fuck off this planet.
Yeah.
I have a Landsraad council meeting to burst in on.
I also think Paul advocated for them staying on Arrakis because he saw the Fremen as the only path toward a future, as the only path. And with a bargaining chip like, I don't know, head of House Atreides, popular in the Landsraad, hot, shredded guy, Leto Atreides,
there's more
I think
paths.
he'd be like, oh yeah, we could go off planet for a bit and then I'll come back to seek out Zendaya, who I feel like is in this troop somewhere. But everyone's wearing masks.
That's good. I like that. That's an interesting twist on it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It makes sense.
And again, I'm just really picturing that kicking down the door to the Landsraad.
I was picturing
You
Aragorn.
just really want that to happen.
You picturing Aragorn?
Aragorn.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yes, the entrance, the Aragorn entrance from Lord of the Rings. Oh, That's iconic.
Just as dusty, just as dirty.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Oscar
ragged
Isaac
and-
could pull that
yeah.
off.
Oh,
yeah.
easily.
Yes.
Oh, easily. Part of the charm.
Yeah. Can we get a remake of Lord of the Rings where Oscar Isaac plays every character?
Well, we like to end our episodes on a question. And so we thought we would stay on brand and in theme for today's episode. I do have a question for the group here to round out today's episode. Elaine, you have been a trooper. I know we're going so long, but you're hanging in there with us. Appreciate you.
Of course, it's been fun.
I'm curious if you two could rewrite any part of Dune, big or small, what's one thing and only one thing, big or small, that you would change about the Dune saga? And Leo, I'll let you go first on this one.
Sure. Yeah, this is pretty low-hanging fruit. I think like most people, when you read Dune, a lot of people in 2023, you read through Dune, you go, hey, this is pretty good. But there are these things that kind of rub you the wrong way because it's written in the 60s and 70s. And it's got some like, the whole sequence of Paul going into his internal, primordial world and seeing the lighting and this really cool poetic stuff. And then he's like, because women are givers and men are takers. And it's like,
yeah.
Do we need that?
Yeah.
I feel like that a lot of it, there are some narrative elements that are just lightly steeped in some old-fashioned ideas about gender and sexuality, especially in the later books.
Yeah.
It's a little tough at times. And I don't think it weakens the story and the narrative to lift your foot off that gas pedal a little bit, to make it a little bit less leaning on like gender stuff. It'd be nice to have some like lesbian, gay, bisexual people in the book, like LGBTQ people in the book would be nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that would only make the story more inclusive and accessible for people, and also would not weaken the story at all. Like, I don't think it's taking something important out to say there's this core difference between men and women, and because and only those two genders, and I am both, and that's why I can blah. I think detaching it from gender altogether would probably make it a more resonant poetic idea, and not be wouldn't call to mind very recent cultural re-examinations of what gender is. I think distract from the story. That's
interesting, sort of smoothing out the rough edges of some outdated ideas that are found throughout the book. Yeah.
And I think, we still have some episodes to record about how fully that is and isn't a problem. But we hear from listeners all the time about like, I didn't like this weirdly horny bit, or like, I didn't like that section was like strange and like outdated.
Yeah.
And especially in the later books, like some stuff happens and it's like, oh man, fuck. It was so close to being just interesting or not interesting and not like upsetting.
Right.
So anyway,
I think that's fair.
To wrap up this little request or this desire, this dream, I think like we all know that Count Fenring is like a bisexual king who's just like out here and just having the time of his life. I would love to see more LGBTQ people.
Yeah. Just lean on that more explicitly.
Yeah.
Without having to dramatically change the characters of the story itself,
Yeah. You wouldn't have to.
That's fair.
Half these characters are already fucking fabulous. You just
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's me.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Elaine? What would you change if you could change something?
Well, mine was pretty much a common sentiment, I think, in the Dune fandom, was that I didn't want Duncan to die in the first novel.
Yep.
He was like my favorite. When I first read it, like I was seeing it through the eyes of Paul, and I saw Duncan as just this really cool friend and neat. All of the parts with him are so intriguing and so diverse. There's so many different sides to him we see, even in his short amount of time. And you wanted to see more. Right. So yes, I would change that he would not have died, even though it was a cool, awesome moment. I think we could have seen his battle prowess featured in a really awesome way where he would have lived. So it would have been epic to see him continue at Paul's side in the war for Arrakis, especially to see him really avenge the death of his beloved Duke.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a sight to behold.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was a common sentiment at the time when people read Dune, and that's why Frank Herbert decided to bring him back so much and make him such a central figure.
Right. In the later books.
But it's still sad because I still see him as, it's not the same Duncan.
Right.
they're each different because they have new memories and stuff. So, so I think instead of, and this is kind of like another what if scenario. So if that would have changed Dune Messiah, what if Duncan was still around? Maybe it's Duke Leto that is the one that's the Gola clone that they Spacing Guild trots out.
Shit.
And then you get to see Oscar Isaac again.
Yeah, we do.
Oh my God.
My goodness.
Yeah, so the Tleilaxu are like, Paul, don't you want your dad back?
Huh?
Oh my God, that's crazy.
That's fun.
That's such a good
fun.
idea. I so fully resonate with what you're saying. He's such a dynamic character. You see so many different sides of him. And sure enough, he's, especially in the first book, he's like one of the first people to really take the Fremen seriously in their culture and he's like really respective of them and like really like admires them. And there's so many cool things about that. And then to see him as a Fedaykin, or to see him as a continuing mentor for Paul, or just to see him as the universe changes to like be there, that could be really great. And it could be really fun. And sure enough, they could do a very anime thing where it's him in the 18 Sardaukar in that hallway, and he gets like stabbed through 2 or 3 times and still kills them all. and then he like collapses, fade to black, and then like toward the end of the book, he comes out with bandages and he's like, just a flesh wound. Just a flesh. They're like, your lung collapsed. God saw fit to give me 2. You know, it's like, or whatever the 300 quote is.
Incredible.
It would be great. It's so cool to have like a triumphant return of that guy. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Here. I love that. Keep Duncan around.
And I think that ends on you, Abu.
Yeah.
What would you change if you could change anything?
Yeah, mine's in a similar vein to Elaine's. I would also like to keep a certain character around. Mm-hmm. And this is entirely for selfish reasons. I haven't thought this through logically at all. But I would really, really want Chani to survive. And that's honestly why I picked our second scenario that we sort of dove into earlier. I would love for Chani to survive. I adore her character in the book as is. But I also don't think she was given enough to do on page. She did plenty in the background.
Yeah.
That is hinted at, but I don't think we get enough scenes with her. We don't get enough moments of her leading and in charge and stepping up to the plate and effectively being the de facto empress of the universe alongside Paul.
Right.
I would love more of that content. And if Chani survived, perhaps we'd get more of that.
Right.
And I think in the larger scheme of things, her surviving perhaps doesn't change the larger story about the future of humanity and the Golden Path all that much, because at the end of the day, like we talked about earlier in scenario 2, Leto still has to rise to power in some way, and he still has to lead humanity down the Golden Path. But at least with the family structure being there, we avoid all of the horrible bloodshed and Shakespearean tragedy that is Children of Dune, you know, Alia dying, Paul being the preacher, the twins barely surviving an assassination attempt. All of that is unnecessary if the family unit is still there.
Yeah, true.
And each of these characters has the support that they need. I think it's a better life for the twins. It's a better life for Alia. It's a better life for Paul and Chani because they have each other and they have love and a family surrounding them. And, you know, at least until the great House Atreides schism takes place and we get the divide between Leto and Paul, I think it makes for a fun story, and perhaps it leads us into something that's very Game of Thronesy.
Yeah.
So for those reasons, I would want to keep Chani around and explore the story with her still in it, and imagine where things could go in that scenario. Plus, I love her. Yeah. So more Chani on screen, more Chani in the books. That's what
bigger paycheck for Zendaya in the Children of Dune adaptation. She's not just like a Force ghost.
Yeah.
She's like gets to be in the scenes.
Yeah. I mean, she's a struggling up and coming actor. We need to
Has
help her secure the bag.
Roles. Yeah, she's really struggling these days, I think. You know, we here in Gom Jabbar advocate for the underdogs like Zendaya and Timothée Chalamet.
Yes, exactly. You support your local artists. Okay, so that wraps up our episode today. But a quick bit of outro housekeeping, dear listener, that we want to leave you with. And then, Elaine, we do want to give you a chance to plug all of your amazing content and let our listeners know where they can find you. So let's quickly wrap up. Before we let you go, dear listener, we want to remind you of a couple of ways to support the show and keep in touch with us. As always, the two best ways to support us is to become a patron on patreon.com/comjabar and to get yourself some Dune-themed swag from our merch store at comjabarshop.com. You can find all of those links in the show notes below.
Indeed. And we love to hear from you. So send us emails. gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. Questions, concerns, comments, or episode ideas like this one. Or if you like hearing Elaine, tell us to bring her back because we want to anyway. And then we'll have an excuse to be like, oh, Elaine, sorry, we just got so many requests. We have to. Our hands are tied. You have to come back. Oh, no. So, yeah, definitely email us, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com.
That's right. And Elaine, we want to hand the mic to you. Tell the listeners where they can find you and what you do and all of the amazing work that you put out in the world.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks again for having me on. This was fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can find me on YouTube at NerdCookies. That's my channel. I cover a variety of sci-fi and fantasy news and lore. So yeah, and you can also, I have a Patreon page. If you want to check that out, there's exclusive perks for members there. And you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com, nerd_cookies. I'm not calling it X. I'm
Elaine,
sorry.
what's twitter.com? Yeah, I was
Twitter?
going to say,
I
don't
never
you
heard
mean
of it.
X.com?
Call it X. X.com is something else. Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird to say that.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
yeah, you can find me there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was, as always, a blast, and we love having you on the show.
Oh, thanks again.
And we love that you put up with us and nerd out with us and are as big a fan of Dune as us. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, yes.
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording. But this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. We're also on TikTok at Gomjabar Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the golden path.